Have you ever wondered what it costs to become a legend? What price does someone pay when the whole world knows their name, but almost nobody knows their pain? Today we're talking about Janet Jackson. At 59 years old, she stands as one of the most powerful voices in music history. But behind every song, every dance move, every smile on stage, there's a story of heartbreak that most people never see. If you grew up listening to Janet's music, or if you remember the magic of Michael Jackson and his incredible family, stay with me, because what I'm about to share will change how you see one of music's brightest stars. And if this story touches your heart, don't forget to hit that like button as a way to honor her journey. Let me take you back to where it all began. Picture a small, cramped house on Jackson Street in Gary, Indiana. It's 1966, and a baby girl has just been born. Her name is Janet. She's the youngest of 10 children in a family that can barely fit inside their tiny two-bedroom home. Can you imagine? 10 kids sharing just 2 bedrooms. They slept with their feet touching each other's heads. The kitchen wasn't just for cooking. It was where they ate, studied, and practiced their music. There was barely enough room to breathe, let alone dream. Janet's father, Joseph Jackson, worked in a steel mill during the day. The work was hard and dangerous. At night, he played guitar in a small band, trying to earn extra money any way he could. Her mother, Catherine, worked part-time at a department store and did everything else at home. She had always dreamed of singing country music, but those dreams got buried under bills and responsibilities. Money was always tight. Food was simple. Life was hard. But the Jackson family had something that poverty couldn't take away. They had talent. Raw, undeniable talent. But here's something most people don't know. Before Janet was even born, tragedy had already visited this family. Her brother Marlon had a twin named Brandon, but Brandon died right after birth. That loss hung over the family like a dark cloud. It made love feel scarce, as if there wasn't enough to go around. And for Janet, growing up in that house meant growing up in the shadow of grief she couldn't even understand yet. Joseph Jackson was not a gentle father. He was strict. Actually, that's putting it lightly. He was harsh. He made his children call him Joseph, never Dad. He believed that discipline was love, that pushing hard was the only way to success. Mistakes during practice meant punishment. Affection was rare. Smiles had to be earned. The house wasn't filled with warmth. It was filled with rules and rehearsals and the constant pressure to be perfect. And for a little girl like Janet, it felt like she was always watching life happen from the outside, even though she was right there in the middle of it. Then something happened that changed everything. One day, Janet's brother Tito picked up their father's guitar. The kids weren't allowed to touch it, but Tito was curious. A string broke. Joseph was furious at first, but then he told Tito to play. And when he did, everyone stopped. The sound was beautiful. Soon, Tito and his older brothers Jackie and Jermaine were practicing together. And then little Michael, who was only 5 years old, opened his mouth and sang. The room went silent. That voice. That tiny boy had a voice that seemed impossible. It was like lightning in a bottle. And just like that, the Jackson 5 was born. In 1969, when Janet was only 3 years old, the family moved from Gary, Indiana to California. The Jackson 5 had signed with Motown Records, one of the biggest music labels in the world. Suddenly, they weren't poor anymore. They had a bigger house. They had opportunities. But for Janet, something was lost in that move. The little bit of normal childhood she might have had disappeared. Now, instead of playing with toys, she was surrounded by music equipment, recording studios, and the constant hustle of her brothers becoming superstars. And by the time Janet was 7 years old, she was already performing on stage at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. Think about that. 7 years old. Most kids that age are worried about homework and recess. But Janet was under bright lights, wearing costumes, dancing choreographed routines, and smiling for crowds of strangers. She never asked for this life. It was chosen for her. Her father made the decisions. The family needed her to perform. So she did. But inside she felt like she was disappearing. Janet once said she dreamed of becoming a jockey or maybe a lawyer when she grew up. She wanted a life that was hers. But destiny had other plans. Or maybe it wasn't destiny. Maybe it was just a father who believed his children existed to become stars whether they wanted to or not. Either way, Janet's childhood wasn't really hers. It belonged to the spotlight, to the audiences, to everyone except the little girl living through it. Growing up like this leaves scars, not the kind you can see, but the kind that go deep into your heart. Janet was surrounded by family, but she felt alone. She was raised in discipline, but she craved gentleness. She was taught to perform, but she longed to simply be. And all of those contradictions, all of that pain, would one day pour out in her music, because sometimes the deepest wounds create the most powerful art. As Janet got older, the pressure only increased. At 10 years old, she was cast in a TV variety show called The Jacksons. It was a family show, full of singing and dancing and jokes. On camera, Janet smiled. She delivered her lines perfectly. She looked like a happy kid. But inside, she was being molded into someone else's vision of who she should be. Then came more acting roles. She appeared on a show called Good Times, playing a character named Penny who came from a broken home. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was acting out pain that felt a little too real. More roles followed, different strokes, fame. Each one added another layer to her image as a young actress. People saw her and thought, oh, she's doing great. She's a star. But Janet wasn't doing great. She was doing what she was told. Her father, Joseph, controlled everything. He decided which roles she took. He managed her career. He pushed her into the music industry, even though she wasn't sure that's what she wanted. And in 1982, her first album came out. It was called Janet Jackson. The album had some nice songs, but it wasn't really her. It was produced by people who wanted her to sound a certain way. It was managed by a father who saw her as part of the family business. When Janet listened to that album, she didn't hear her own voice. She heard everyone else's expectations, and that hurt. A second album came next, and it was the same story. Pretty songs, professional production, but no soul, no truth. Just Janet Jackson trying to be what everyone wanted her to be. By this point, Janet was in her early 20s, and she was exhausted. Exhausted from pretending, exhausted from being compared to her brothers, especially Michael. Michael had just released Thriller, the biggest album in the history of music. He was the king of pop. And Janet? She was still being introduced as Michael Jackson's little sister. No matter what she did, no matter how hard she worked, people couldn't see her as her own person. That comparison crushed her. It made her feel small, invisible, like she would never be enough.
But then, something inside Janet snapped in the best way possible. She decided she was done. Done being controlled. Done being molded. Done living in someone else's shadow. In 1986, she made the bravest decision of her life. She fired her father as her manager. Can you imagine how hard that must have been to look at the man who raised you, who pushed you, who controlled everything, and say no more? It took incredible courage, and it changed everything. Janet teamed up with two producers named Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. Together, they locked themselves in a studio for 6 weeks, and what came out of that studio was not just an album, it was a revolution. The album was called Control, and oh my goodness, was it perfect. The beats were sharp, the lyrics were bold, the message was clear. This was Janet Jackson taking control of her life, her music, and her identity. Songs like Nasty and What Have You Done For Me Lately weren't just catchy, they were statements. They were Janet telling the world, I'm not anybody's little sister, I'm not anybody's puppet, I'm Janet, and I'm here to stay. Control sold over 10 million copies. It shot to #1 on the charts, and suddenly, everyone who had dismissed her, everyone who had doubted her, had to sit down and pay attention. Janet Jackson was no longer in anyone's shadow. She was the light. But success always comes with a price, and for Janet, the price was steep. Behind the glitter and the applause, she was still carrying wounds from her childhood. The pressure to be perfect didn't go away just because she was famous. If anything, it got worse. Rehearsals were brutal. Tours were exhausting. And even though she was selling millions of records, inside, she still felt like that little girl in Gary, Indiana, trying to prove she was good enough. Then in 1989, Janet released her next album. It was called Rhythm Nation 1814. And this wasn't just music, this was a movement. Janet created an album about social issues, about racism, about poverty, about unity. The music videos looked like short films with military-style choreography and powerful messages. MTV played them on repeat. The world watched in awe. Janet became the first and only artist to have 7 top 5 singles from a single album. She wasn't just a pop star anymore, she was a cultural force. But again, the cost was high. The rehearsals were punishing. The choreography was so intense it felt like military training. Night after night, Janet performed with perfection. And night after night, she collapsed in her hotel room, alone and exhausted. The applause was loud, but the silence afterward was deafening. In 1991, Janet signed a record deal with Virgin Records for somewhere between $32 and $50 million. It was the biggest deal ever given to a female artist at that time. Headlines celebrated her. The industry praised her. But inside, Janet was still fighting. Fighting to be seen as more than Michael's sister. Fighting to prove she wasn't just lucky. Fighting to convince herself that she deserved all of this success. 2 years later, in 1993, she released an album simply called Janet. This one was different. It was softer, more intimate, more personal. The song That's the Way Love Goes became a massive hit and won her a Grammy. But more than that, it showed the world a side of Janet they hadn't seen before. Vulnerable, feminine, real. For the first time, Janet wasn't just performing, she was sharing herself. And millions of women around the world felt seen because of it. But here's the painful truth that most people don't know. Even as Janet was conquering the music world, she was suffering in private. In her 2022 documentary, she revealed something heartbreaking. Michael, her beloved brother, used to make jokes about her weight. He probably thought it was harmless teasing, but for Janet, those words cut deep. In an industry that already judged women's bodies ruthlessly, hearing that from her own brother was devastating. It damaged her self-esteem in ways that fame could never fix. The grind of fame was relentless. Endless tours, sleepless nights, flying from city to city, performing in pain, smiling through exhaustion. On stage, she was fire and rhythm and power. But off stage, she was lonely. So lonely. Millions of people loved her music, but who loved her? Who saw past the superstar and cared about the woman underneath? In 1997, Janet released an album called The Velvet Rope, and this one was different from anything she had ever done. This was raw. This was real. This was Janet opening up about her battle with depression. She poured her pain into every song. She talked about identity, self-worth, and trying to heal from wounds that wouldn't close. Critics called it her masterpiece. Fans said it saved their lives. And Janet, she said making that album was like wrapping bandages around wounds that had bled for years. Music wasn't just her career anymore. It was her therapy, her survival. But while Janet was trying to heal herself, the world kept throwing punches. In 1993, her brother Michael was hit with scandal. I won't go into details, but the accusations were serious and the media coverage was brutal. And even though Janet had nothing to do with it, she suffered too. She was about to sign a huge sponsorship deal with Coca-Cola, but the company pulled out. Why? Because she was a Jackson. Because people assumed guilt by association. Janet was devastated. She said it felt like being punished for sins that weren't hers. Even when she got to work with Michael, the joy was stolen. In 1995, they recorded a song together called Scream. It should have been a beautiful reunion. Brother and sister, two of the biggest stars in the world, creating magic together. But handlers kept them separated. They filmed their parts on different sets. They barely saw each other. Janet later said it felt like they weren't even allowed to be family anymore, like the world had turned them into products instead of people. And then came the moment that almost destroyed her career. February 1st, 2004, the Super Bowl halftime show. Janet was performing with Jimmy Timberlake when a wardrobe malfunction happened. For a split second, more was exposed than intended. It was an accident, a fraction of a moment. But the reaction was nuclear. America was outraged. The media went insane, and the industry turned its back on Janet. Radio stations stopped playing her songs. Music channels stopped showing her videos. Award shows uninvited her. Her career, which she had built with blood, sweat, and tears over decades, was nearly erased overnight. And here's the cruelest part. Jimmy Timberlake, who was right there with her, walked away almost untouched. His career continued just fine. But Janet was crucified. She later said, "One mistake on stage, and my entire career was judged." For years, Janet lived in exile. The industry she had helped build abandoned her. But here's what they didn't understand. Janet Jackson is not someone who breaks. She bends, she hurts, she bleeds, but she doesn't break. In 2015, she came back with an album called Unbreakable. Even the title was a message. You tried to destroy me, but I'm still here.
Through all of this, through all the pain and the scandals and the injustice, Janet kept creating. She kept singing, she kept dancing, because music was the one thing that never betrayed her. Her career became a symphony of fire and silence, of nights drenched in applause and nights drowned in tears. She sold over 100 million records worldwide. She became the first artist to have #1 albums in 4 consecutive decades. But more than any of those achievements, she became resilience itself. Now, let's talk about Janet's heart. Because if her career was a battlefield, her love life was a war zone. At 18 years old, barely more than a child herself, Janet got married. His name was James DeBarge, a singer from a family group called DeBarge. Janet thought she was in love. More than that, she thought marriage would be her escape from her father's control. She thought James would be her freedom. But she was so wrong. James was troubled. He battled addiction. Their marriage was chaotic. Friends remembered Janet slipping out at night just to get away, just to breathe. What she thought would be freedom became another kind of prison. The marriage lasted less than a year. By November 1985, it was annulled, erased, like it never happened. But the pain didn't disappear with the paperwork. And worse, a cruel rumor started spreading. People whispered that Janet had secretly had a baby during that marriage and given it up. For nearly 40 years, that lie followed her everywhere. Strangers believed it, tabloids printed it, and Janet carried that burden in silence. Finally, in her 2022 documentary, she addressed it with just 5 tired words. That was not true. Behind those words was the exhaustion of a woman who had been chased by lies for decades. That first marriage taught Janet a hard lesson. Love doesn't always set you free. Sometimes it just adds more chains. And escape isn't the same as liberation. She was only 18, but that heartbreak aged her in ways that years never could. In 1991, Janet tried again. She secretly married a man named Rene Elizondo, Jr. Rene was a dancer and choreographer. Unlike her first marriage, this one seemed right. Rene was creative, supportive, and understood her world. Together, they didn't just build a marriage, they built art. Rene directed some of Janet's most intimate music videos. He co-wrote songs with her. He was her creative partner, her confidant, her safe place. For nearly 10 years, they kept their marriage a secret from the world. And for a while, it worked. Janet finally felt like she had found her person. Someone who saw her, not just the superstar, but the woman underneath. Someone who loved her for who she was, not what she could give. But even the strongest love can crack under pressure. By the late 1990s, things started falling apart. Arguments replaced intimacy. Distance replaced closeness. And in 1999, Rene filed for divorce. Suddenly, the secret Janet had guarded for 10 years was exposed, not through celebration,
but through courtrooms and lawyers and tabloid headlines. Renee demanded over $10 million. The case dragged on for years, finally settling in 2003. For Janet, this wasn't just about money. It was about betrayal. The man she had trusted most, the man she had built her most personal work with, was now sitting across from her in court. It was devastating. She later said, "I loved Renee very much, and he knew it." And years later, Renee admitted, "I don't think people realize what a wonderful woman she truly is." That's what makes their story so tragic. They didn't stop loving each other, but love wasn't enough. They went from creating music together to fighting over millions, from sitting side by side at the piano to sitting on opposite sides of a courtroom. And unlike many divorces, there were no children to soften the blow, no family to rebuild around, just emptiness. Janet had dreamed of a home filled with love and laughter and children. Instead, she was left with silence. The collapse of this marriage stripped away more than money or time. It stripped away her belief that love could heal her, that partnership could save her. Her first marriage had stolen her innocence. This one stole her.
The news broke like an earthquake. Within minutes, the entire world knew. TV anchors cried on air. Fans collapsed in the streets. Hospitals and memorials became shrines. Over 1 billion people watched his funeral. But while the world mourned loudly, Janet mourned in silence. The hysteria outside was deafening, but inside her soul, there was only one sound, the hollow silence of her brother's absence. The funeral was held on July 7, 2009, at the Staples Center in Los Angeles. Over 20,000 people filled the arena. Michael's golden casket, covered in white roses, glowed under the lights. Gospel choirs sang, celebrities spoke, but the most heartbreaking moment came when Michael's 11-year-old daughter, Paris, stepped to the microphone. Her hands were shaking, her voice was breaking, and she said, "Ever since I was born, Daddy has been the best father you could ever imagine." The entire arena erupted in tears. Grown men sobbed, strangers held each other, and Janet, standing nearby, could barely breathe. Outside, thousands of fans lit candles and sang, "We Are the World." It felt like the entire planet was grieving together. Months later, at the MTV Video Music Awards, Janet honored Michael the only way she knew how, through performance. Under a single spotlight, she danced to Scream, the song they had recorded together. Behind her, Michael's image filled the screen. Every movement was rage, grief, love, sorrow. The audience wept, but no one felt the pain as deeply as Janet. She later confessed, "There's not a day that goes by I don't think of him." In hotel rooms, especially when she's alone in Paris, she plays his music videos through the night. She sobs until dawn. Her body aches from grief. Because this wasn't just the loss of a brother. This was the loss of the only person who truly understood her childhood, her pain, her loneliness, the strange, heavy burden of being a Jackson. Michael left behind 3 children, Prince, Paris, and Biggie, and a fortune tangled in debt. At his death, his estate owed nearly $500 million. But even in tragedy, Michael's genius continued to shine. Through streaming, licensing, Broadway shows, and posthumous releases, his estate grew. Today, it's worth somewhere between $2 and $2.5 billion. His music still earns millions every year. He remains the highest-earning deceased celebrity in the world. His children have grown up without him. Prince, now 28, focuses on philanthropy. Paris, his only daughter, became a model, actress, and musician, pouring her grief into haunting songs. Biggie, once called Blanket, is now 23 and stays mostly private. Each of them receives millions of dollars annually from the estate, but no amount of money can replace the father they lost. For Janet, seeing her brother's children grow up without him deepens her grief. She once said, I see Michael in their eyes, but that reflection only makes his absence hurt more. She can hear his voice in every arena. She can watch his videos anytime, but she can never call him, never hug him, never hear him laugh again. And the losses didn't stop there. In June 2018, Janet's father, Joseph Jackson, passed away at 89. He was the man who built the Jackson Empire, but also the man who wounded his children in the process. Janet's grief was complicated. She mourned the father who gave her a career, but took away pieces of her childhood. She said, "My father drove us, pushed us, and yes, sometimes hurt us. But without him, there would be no Jackson 5, no Janet, no Michael." And then, in January 2024, another blow. Tito Jackson, her older brother and one of the original Jackson 5, died at 70. Losing Michael had torn a hole in her heart. Losing Tito was like losing the quiet glue that held the family together. His death was quieter than Michael's, but for Janet, it was another fracture in the same wound. Now, at 59, Janet Jackson lives between two worlds. She's still a superstar. Her net worth is around $200 million. She owns beautiful homes in Los Angeles and London. She drives luxury cars and travels by private jet when necessary. But her greatest treasure isn't found in any of that. Her greatest treasure is Issa. Every morning she wakes up to his laughter. She takes him to school. She cheers for him at ball games. She reads him bedtime stories. After decades of dazzling the world, Janet's truest triumph is the peace she's created at home, a peace where her son can grow up feeling safe and loved. Janet still performs. In 2023, her Together Again tour filled arenas with fans from multiple generations. Her Las Vegas residency continues into 2025. When she steps on stage, the years dissolve. She is still fire and rhythm and power. But when she comes home, she's just mom. And maybe that's the most beautiful thing of all. Janet Jackson's life has been a symphony of joy and sorrow. She rose from a cramped house in Gary, Indiana, to become one of the greatest artists of all time. She sold over 100 million records. She broke barriers for women in music. She turned pain into anthems that the whole world still sings. But she also lost her brother Michael. She lost her brother Tito. She lost her father. She survived 3 failed marriages. She battled depression. She was blacklisted by an industry she helped build. She was mocked for her weight. She was compared to her brother her entire life. And through it all, she kept rising. Because that's who Janet Jackson is. She's resilience itself. Her wounds became verses. Her scars became songs. Her grief became grace. And now, at 59, she stands not as someone who avoided tragedy, but someone who transformed it into something beautiful. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to Janet's story. If her music ever moved you, if her strength ever inspired you, if her story touched your heart today, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to this channel so we can continue honoring the legends who shaped our world. Because Janet Jackson isn't just history. She's living proof that even the deepest heartbreak can give birth to unshakable hope. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.